It's September 17th, 2021. My name is John Harry. I'm the Collections and Digitization Specialist at the Milwaukee County Historical Society. This is an oral history interview with Claire Kutz. I do need to make a note, too, that I am Claire's grandson-in-law. This interview is taking place at Claire's apartment in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. So to start, we'll just fill in some background about your life. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Hartford, actually, but we lived, the first apartment that my mother and dad had was down on 13th and Cherry in Milwaukee. And they moved from there when I was a baby, and then they bought a house in a little subdivision called Cozy Dell, and it was off of 27th Street between Grange and Ramsey. And at that time, it was all fields, farms, and then our little nucleus of houses.
What were your parents' names and what did they do?
My mother's name was Verna. Lore was my maiden name, and she was a housewife, a very busy one because she baked everything and sewed everything. My dad worked for Seal Test Dairy, and yeah, he was busy too. He'd help Grandpa on the farm and bring home meat for us, and he raised chickens and had a huge garden. They're very busy people.
What was your dad's name?
Melvin.
Melvin.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about where you lived. What do you remember about your childhood when you think back?
It was a good time. Yeah. My parents were wonderful parents. I had two older brothers that I used to terrorize, and a younger brother who was 5 years younger than me, so he was my little buddy. And then years later, my sister was born. But we played outside all the time. We played Red Rover, kick the can, hide and seek, baseball. We didn't even have a TV. The big highlight was listening to certain radio programs, and like the Green Hornet, and of course at Christmas time, Billy the Brownie. And yeah, we were busy kids, and we went to a one-room schoolhouse. We walked, and I always tell my kids I walked 2.5 miles, and then of course they say uphill both ways, and they never believed me. But one time, my oldest daughter and I, we clocked it. We determined where that school building used to be, and it was 2.5 miles. I was 5 years old, and I was walking 2.5 miles to school.
What do you remember about that, going to school, like that, in your earlier years?
I do remember in the winter time, my brothers were kind of in charge of me. They had to look out for their baby sister, who was kind of a pain once in a while. But in the winter, my dad told them they had to pull me to school on a sled, which now I think back, that was pretty unfair. Plus, then my feet would be like icicles when I get to school. But we managed. I mean, all the kids, everybody lived the same way, so I didn't feel like we were different. But Mom and Dad were always there for us kids, and everything they did was for their children.
We'll stay on school for a second. What were your favorite, subjects even as you got a little older?
Oh, that's a tough one. And when I went to the one-room schoolhouse, that was for 3 years. And then they built another school, and then I went there for 4th and 5th grade, and then they sold that house, so we moved to West Dallas. My favorite subjects, I was pretty good at math. I loved to read. I could devour books. And then later on, when I got into high school, I took commercial courses because I wanted to get an office job. To me, that was my choice for work when I got out of high school.
Before we get into more of your later, teenage years, let's go back to your family life at home. What was food like? What did you eat? What did your parents feed you guys?
Well, Dad raised chickens, so we always had fresh eggs and fresh chickens. And when he would butcher the chickens. That was an annual affair. My brothers helped with that. My mother canned the meat because they didn't have a freezer. In fact, we didn't have a refrigerator for a long time. We had an ice box. And then the iceman would come with a big block of ice and switch it over. And when they got their first refrigerator, this is really strange. They had a box that you would put quarters in to keep it running, and that's how you paid for the refrigerator. And that was a big deal. My dad always had a huge garden. Again, my mother canned everything. And Grandpa was still on the farm, and my dad would go out and help him because he was raised on a farm, and he would help my grandpa butcher livestock, and then my grandpa would send meat home. I'm not sure how they stored that meat. I think they smoked a lot of it. And so we ate good,
Did you ever go out to eat growing
No,
up?
no. Nobody had money.
Yeah. So tell me about your family. You mentioned your siblings. So how many kids were there?
5 of us, yeah.
And then did you also have extended family that you saw?
Oh, yeah, especially my dad's family. My dad he had 2 brothers. His one brother didn't have children, but his oldest brother lived on a farm, and he had 3 kids, and we would go visit him quite a bit. And the cousins, we all kind of hung out together, and that was nice. And my mother's family, there weren't too many cousins, which is unusual because my mother was the oldest of 7 children, but she had the most kids. And by the time her siblings had their families, we were older, so there wasn't that much interaction. But yeah, mostly my dad's family.
And what was your neighborhood like? Your neighbors, and what was it like? And you said it was this West Milwaukee, or no?
What was their neighbor? It was just a little nucleus of houses, and all the kids hung around together. And there was a field right next door to our house, and that was the unofficial baseball diamond for the whole neighborhood. And it was a small subdivision, and then we would all walk to school together. Safety in numbers, and because that was quite a walk. And so my world was small.
Did you ever go into downtown, into Milwaukee at this point?
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because once a year, this was back when the rapid transit was still in existence, my mother would take me on the rapid transit. We would go downtown, in the downtown area, and shop, and we'd always have lunch at Woolworth's lunch counter, and I would always get a BLT with French fries. That was my favorite. And yeah, once a year, just my mom and I, and that was special. That was really special.
And what was the reason to go downtown?
I
Shopping?
think, yeah, just shopping and bonding between my mom and I. And I think my dad, because I was the first girl and he didn't have any sisters, he kind of spoiled me. And I think he wanted me to have that experience. So my mom and I would, just the 2 of us. And that was nice.
Good. That's great. So let's get back to kind of maybe education. And so you were at the One Road Schoolhouse, and then where did you go next after you got older? And then it became a bigger school, but did you go straight from that to high school?
Oh, when we moved away from Cozy Dell, then my mom and dad bought a house on 90th and Montana in West Dallas. And then I went to Johnson School. And that was huge compared to what I was used to. It was a pretty tough transition for me. And I went there until I graduated from 8th grade. And then I went to West Milwaukee High School. And college was not an option, unfortunately, because no money, yeah.
Did you wish you would have been able to go to college?
If I had, I would have probably gone to become a school teacher with the little ones, the little kids, before they get sassy.
When you were at West Milwaukee High School, what do you remember about your high school years?
I wasn't crazy about high school. I was not one of the in crowd, Um, I guess I was just quiet, which brings laughter from my children when I say that. Um, I had a few close friends. My closest friend ended up marrying my brother, so she's still in the family, and that's kind of cool. Um, I did the usual, the football games and different activities, but it wasn't really a highlight of my life. I was glad when I graduated.
So you went to West Milwaukee. That was years before you were there. Was where Liberace went.
Yeah.
And you said that he used to come play. What was that like when Liberace came to play for the school?
Well, we were always excited because that was he would come in a suit and a tie. That was before he got the candelabra and all the sequins and things, and he was just very nice. He'd get up there and address the kids in the audience, and then he would sit down and play the piano, and wow, he was good. And yeah, he would do that often. I think about probably almost every year he would make a visit to the high school. And now I think it's not a high school anymore, but they have a building. If it's an auditorium, I'm not sure, but it's got his name on it.
Yeah.
So, in memory of him. So.
You mentioned you have your best friend married your brother. What was her name?
Nancy.
Nancy. And what did you and Nancy do for fun when you were at school?
This is going to sound strange, but we would take our little radios and just walk. We'd take walks to the neighborhood and talk and play music. That was at very low key. And one time on one of these walks, Nancy said, I got something from home, and she pulled out a cigarette. I had never smoked. We were in high school, and I tried it, and I thought, oh, this is terrible. And I was so afraid when I came home, my mother and dad would find out, but they didn't. But so I still, to this day, I tease her that she tried to lure me into smoking, and she never smoked either. Just one of those kids. Well, we didn't do much, Oh, they would have movies in the summertime down at the school, and they would hang a big sheet on the side of the building, and you'd take your blanket and your treats, and you'd walk down there and just sit there and watch the movie. That was a highlight. Life was so simple back then.
What happened after high school? So you graduated, and then what?
I started looking for a job. They were very plentiful, and I had the qualifications to be a secretary. And I applied at the electric company and the telephone company, and they both would have hired me right away, and I went with the telephone company. And
you were secretary there?
Yeah, and I started out, they had like a satellite office on 32nd and Clyburn. And that's since his closed. So then I transferred to the downtown office on Broadway. And I worked there for 9.5 years till I started my family.
And so would you take the streetcar rail line into the city? Or how would you get from...
I rode the buses all over because I didn't drive.
Because you were living still in what, West Allis or West Milwaukee?
I was living in West Allis at the time. And then my mother and dad sold that house and they moved to the north side, close to Timmerman Field. And there was no bus service out there, but I found a ride with somebody that worked at the telephone company, and so I managed. But I knew all the bus lines and the schedules, and I got pretty good at that. But
how did you like working for the telephone company?
I liked it. Yeah, that was a good job, and I liked the people. In high school, it's more cliquey, and I didn't fit in. But when I started working with actual adults, I fit in, and it was a good atmosphere. I met some wonderful people. One of my best friends, I still occasionally keep in touch on the phone with her, and she was my matron of honor when I got married, and she's one day older than I am, and I never let her forget that. So I keep in touch with a few people, but unfortunately, when you reach my age, a lot of them are gone already, you know. But
So you worked there for 9 years, and then you said you started a family, and so maybe this is a good time to start talking about how you and you met Grandpa Jerry. So how did you meet Grandpa Jerry?
well, this is crazy. A friend of mine, her name was Zona. She and I had an apartment on 76 in Oklahoma, and another friend of ours, Lori, was living alone, and I know she didn't like it. So we got our heads together and decided, let's find a bigger place and move in together. And we found this upper flat on 69th and Beecher, and 3 bedrooms, perfect. And our rent was $99 a month. And that was in 1959 or 1960 when we moved there. And we were cleaning the place up, and the landlady lived downstairs, and she says, I'm going to get the kid next door, because everybody's a kid, you know. The kid next door, he's going to come over, he's going to paint. And you tell him what colors you want all the rooms painted. And that was Jerry. And so we started to date, and within a year we were married.
And what would you, when you would date, where would you go? What sort of...
We liked to dance. I'm not a dancer, but I could dance with him. And there was a place on 16th and Mitchell called Doc Perko's. And we would go there, and our favorite dance was the polka. We're in Wisconsin now, you know. we would go there a lot and just dance and have a few beers, and then we had my friend Lori. She was a wonderful cook, and we would have Jerry and his friend come over, and she would cook a nice meal, and then we would just, and we had parties, the girls, the 3 of us, and had a pretty good social life, but calm compared to how it is now, you know.
And so then you said a year later or so you got married.
Mm-hmm.
What's the date that you got married on?
October 21st, 1960.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you remember about the wedding?
It was small. It was very small. We just we got married. The church we got married in, I don't remember the name of it, but it was on 76th in Oklahoma. And then we just had a buffet in the basement that the Ladies Guild put together. Very small, but it was nice, you know.
Did you go on a honeymoon or anything, or a trip afterwards?
We just went up north, you know, fishing. That man likes to fish. You know?
So then, and again, and I think it's worth saying you have been divorced for a long time now. So what was your marriage like?
It was great at first, but we had, in 10 years of marriage, we had 4 children, and it put quite a strain on the marriage, and so it wasn't as great as I would have liked to have been. And then the great outdoors was a very strong calling for him, so he would be hunting and fishing a lot while I was home with the kids, and you know, and it just kind of fell apart. But we were married 23 years before it ended, and I see him often, the kids see him often, and that's good, and you know.
So you went through a pretty big life change religiously around the time of the end of the marriage,
right?
Where you converted to being a Jehovah's Witness.
Correct.
Can you kind of walk me through how that happened?
Well, they came to my door for a short period of our life. We lived in Illinois, Lake Zurich, Illinois, because Jerry's, if he would have had his choice, he would have stayed in the horse business. He loved training horses. He would take them to show horses and ride them out in the ring and, you know, be judged and everything. But unless you own horses, there isn't enough money in that. But Okay, now I lost a thought here, John.
It's okay.
What was the question again?
Just your about becoming a Jehovah's Witness.
Oh, yes, they came to my door the first time when I lived in Illinois, and I didn't have a clue who they were, but I talked to them, and then we moved back up here, and then they knocked on my door again, and I thought, who are these people? Because I was pretty active in the Lutheran Church for my whole life, and but I listened to them, and I started a Bible study, but I didn't do anything. I didn't commit myself to the religion until after Jerry and I got our divorce, and I'm still one of Jehovah's Witnesses.
And what about being a Jehovah's Witness is the thing that spoke to you that said, I think this is who I am?
I always questioned the number of religions, and in my heart, I didn't feel that. I felt like they were picking and choosing what they wanted to teach. And I've always had a tremendous amount of respect for the Bible. And I found that Jehovah's Witnesses really do their best, because we're imperfect. But they make the most earnest attempt to follow what that book says. And that really impressed me. And I learned a lot of things, and I read my Bible all the time, but I was learning things that were right there that I didn't have an explanation for. And I just felt like it was the right choice.
Was there any challenges because being a Jehovah's Witness is very different than being a Lutheran?
Yes.
Was there any challenges adapting? I mean, there's the holidays are gone in some ways.
Yeah.
And birthdays are not as recognized.
Right.
Was that difficult?
Probably more for my mom, because my mother didn't get angry very often, but she was angry with me, but not to the point where it caused a division. My family eventually figured out that I was serious about this. And see, they try to pattern the way our organization is to the way the first century Christians, Jesus and his disciples, how they, organized the congregations and did things. We try to follow that. And so we don't have a paid clergy. We have a body of elders, and they take care of whatever has to be taken care of. And the holidays, I didn't know how I was going to handle that, because I knew that was going to be a tough one. So I was a coward, and I wrote them a letter explaining, and I did show scriptures as to what I was basing my beliefs on. And the anxiety kind of faded away, and they just accepted it. And it's okay. We still speak to each other, and we get along, and so that transition went a lot better than some people I know whose families practically disown them, which I didn't think that would ever happen in my family. They're just not that kind of people.
Sure. Let's backtrack a little bit and talk about having a family. And you said you had 4 kids. Mm-hmm. And can you tell me their names and what years they were born?
Stephanie was born in 1961. My redheaded dynamo. Jerry Lynn was born in 1964. And then in 1969, I had twin boys, identical twin boys, and Doug and Darren.
And what are maybe from their earlier childhood, maybe after even you had the boys, what are some memories that come to mind as far as what was that like for you? And
I was very busy. But I was a stay-at-home mom, but then when the boys turned 3 and the girls were 10 and 8, out of necessity, I had to go back to work. And of course, I had been out of the office setting for so many years, and things had changed. So it was hard to get back to that. So I had to take what I could find, and I ended up getting a job at Nestle's. a candy store, which the first year I gained 30 pounds. Yeah, you know, and I hated it. But they had a good insurance program, and that's why I went to work.
I know that you got your driver's license. How old were you when you got your driver's license?
50.
And why did, at 50 years old, you decide I'm going to get my
I had no choice. I knew that I went all those years. I always had a ride, and so I managed. But I knew that once my marriage was over, I was going to get backed in a corner, and I would have to get my license. I was afraid, and I was just taking odd jobs during that period of time, just anything to make money. I took in sewing. I worked at a gas station. Worked at Downey Duck Farm. Oh, that was not my favorite. And then this man that I knew for years, he approached me and he said, Claire, Randy, another gentleman that I didn't really know, he was from the Oconomowoc area. They had a construction company together, and he said, we need a secretary. And the job is yours, but you have to learn how to drive. That was my corner. And so I knew enough not to ask my sons to teach me, because they were all driving by then, you know. And so I went to a school, and that worked out pretty good. And then I got my first car. It was a Ford. I don't remember what year it was. Actually, somebody gave it to me. And that's how I started driving. And I've never been a real, I mean, the farthest I ever drove in my life was up to Green Bay to visit my grandkids. And I don't do that anymore. But at least it got me around. But why I waited that long, oh. If I could change anything in the past, that would be one on the top of the list, you know.
So after you got divorced, did you date? Did you?
No.
No?
I made up my mind that no, not going to go there. Okay. I'm just, no, I don't mean you and I just mean I'm not going to go there. I was happy with my life. I got 4 wonderful kids. By then I had become one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and the friendships I have formed over the years are solid. And I didn't feel like I just really wanted to go back to the dating scene. I never liked it in the first place. And I certainly wasn't going to. I made a decision not to get married again. And it's been fine. It's been really good.
I think maybe, so after you got divorced, and then the kids were either out of the house or on their way out of the house at that point.
Oh, actually, Stephanie was out on her own. Jerry Lynn was still in high school. And unfortunately, Doug and Darren were only 12 when their dad moved out. That was rough. That was probably the most difficult part of time of my life, because I hurt for them. You know, they needed their dad, and he wasn't there. And now they get along great with him, which is fine. That's the way it should be. And but we got through it. The boys and I were real close, because when we sold our house in Waterford, the boys and I got an apartment, and we were roommates. Each one of us paid a third of everything, and these kids were fresh out of high school, and they never complained about it. They just knew that that's the way it was. And then eventually they came to Oconomowoc and got me to move here, and I like it here a lot. So
that's good.
Yeah.
I think maybe we can hear somebody talking right outside the window. So
oh, the high school kids. That's
what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, you live near Oconomowoc East, right?
Yeah, the high school is that way, and then they purchased the old clinic.
Oh.
And turned it into a classroom. So then this path is for the kids to get to the next building.
Well, I think maybe I have just some kind of, I don't know, big things that have happened either in the world or the United States as well as Milwaukee, and I just thought I might just see what memories you have of certain things. Might be kind of a fun thing to do. So let's start like way back when you were a pretty small kid. Do you remember anything about World War II?
Oh yeah,
How
yeah.
old were you when World War II started,
Um,
or abouts?
well, I was going to that one-room schoolhouse, and boy, what year did it start? Let's see,
41. Well,
41.
For the United States, 41.
Okay, well, yeah, I was 5 years old then, 6 years old. And if you go back a little bit further, I remember when President Roosevelt died, and Harry S. Truman was the vice president. Oh, and then I remember, and this is really something, then he ran for another term against Dewey, who was the governor of New York, I believe. And everybody saw for sure that Dewey was going to win. In fact, the Milwaukee Journal and the Milwaukee Sentinel, they were separate then. They both had their newspapers already printed. Headlines, Dewey, new president, and Truman won. So they had to scrap all those newspapers. And I was just a kid then, and I remember, oh my goodness, that was pretty interesting. I do remember when the war ended, that was one of the few times my dad packed the whole family in the car and we drove downtown. And there were people all over, and confetti and streamers and horns honking and people hugging each other, and that was in 45, so I would have been 10. And I thought that was so neat that this is over with now, and hopefully life can be normal, whatever that means. Yeah, that was pretty exciting. I do remember.
Do you remember anything about like life during the war being different than
Oh yeah,
after, obviously?
a lot of rationing. I was born in 35, and that was kind of the tail end, if I remember my dates correctly, kind of the end of the Depression. Fortunately, my father always had work. He always had a job. And I remember my mother, she baked everything we ate. Oh, she baked some good stuff. And she would buy her flour in 100-pound bags. And the bags were printed fabric. And so when she used the flour, she'd wash the flour sack and make me a dress. I mean, nobody had money, you know. Sugar rationing, gas rationing, shoe rationing. You got like, I think, almost like a ticket or something that allowed you so many gallons of gas, and there was just enough to get my dad to work and home again, and then an occasional drive out to Grandma and Grandpa's on Sunday afternoon, and that was it.
Wow.
That's all the gas you got. But again, that's how everybody lived. We didn't think it was a hardship, you know, because on Sunday afternoons we would get an ice cream cone then.
Not so bad. What about you went to a lot of concerts? What are some like concert experiences that you remember the most?
Oh, that was when I was working, when I was out of high school, and this one friend, Lori, one of my roommates, she and I were real close friends, and we did a lot of things. We would, I remember, can I have a little break? Well, I like music. I love live performances, and I've seen some big stars. There was a little place downtown Milwaukee on 6th and Wisconsin called the Brass Rail, and they would have some pretty big name performers there, and I love jazz. So I got to see Dave Brubeck, and I got to see Billie Holiday. And at that time, I didn't know that much about how bad her personal life was. But she got up on that stage, very elegant, big white flower in her hair, and opened her mouth, and that voice, oh my goodness, it was just smooth. And they would have a jazz festival. I don't know if it was every year, but if it was, I was there. And I got to see Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, Nat King Cole. And one concert that I remember in particular was really wild. They had Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich, the two best drummers, and they were together in the same show, and they had a drum duel. I was dancing in the aisles, and I don't dance, you know. That was exciting. I've seen, more recently, I've seen Harry Connick Jr. I like him. I always wanted to see Frank Sinatra. Well, you know, who can afford that? And I never did, but there's a performer, his name is Duke Hazlitt, and his whole act was based on Frank Sinatra, and he was good. And he would come to Milwaukee, so I would go there and pretend it was Frank. And I saw him a couple times, and yeah, we would do things like that, or we had our favorite little pub where we would go right next door to the telephone company on Broadway.
And, do you remember what it was called?
Pardon?
Do you remember what it was called?
The Mayfair. And we'd go in there, and we got to know the owner, and we'd have a couple of drinks and a sandwich. You could get food there. And everybody from the telephone company would go there afterwards. I also sang in the Wisconsin Telephone Company choir. And we appeared on TV a couple times. We'd have our annual concert. That was fun. And we'd always feature the music from a Broadway musical. We did Oklahoma one year. That's the only one I remember. That was fun, though. And I remember the name of our director was Donald Moore, and he was good. We had fun. We just had fun.
You were kind of coming of age as the Milwaukee Braves baseball team came to town.
Oh, yeah.
And of course the Brewers came later, but do you remember, what do you remember of the team, the Braves?
I was a groupie, kind of. I would, on payday, I would head down there, and I had to take a streetcar and then walk down this hill by the Veterans Cemetery there and get down to the stadium, stand in line, get my tickets. If I remember correctly, bleacher seats were 50 cents. And I used to take my youngest brother a lot, or I'd go with my girlfriends, and then we would wait outside after the games and try to get pictures of the players, and I had this big major crush on Eddie Matthews, third baseman. And yeah, we went to a lot of games, and then when they played in Chicago, we would go down there, a group of us, and we would stay at the Edgewater Beach Hotel, which is now gone, and we're right on the lake. And then we'd go to the game, and then the players stayed at that hotel. So we would go downstairs in the morning and sit in the coffee shop for having our breakfast and just watch the players. That's,
So it must have been a big deal then in '56 when they won the World Series.
Oh, I was working at the telephone company at that time. And they let everybody, they had a TV set up down in the cafeteria, and they let people go down there whenever they wanted to, just to watch bits and pieces. They were a very relaxed atmosphere. And as long as somebody was manning the phones, And yeah, that was, and I think I went downtown. Yeah, I did go downtown for that. If I remember, yeah, I did. I had almost forgotten that. And again, people all over, and ticker tapes and confetti and a lot of hugging, and
fun.
That was exciting.
You mentioned seeing like Duke Ellington and Billie Holiday, and Milwaukee has gone through a lot of changes over times from like ethnic and race perspectives. Was there ever like a conversation about like that while you were going to see like Billie Holiday play, where people like, was that a thing, like that she was African American?
I don't remember that. I really don't recall any. You mean like other people saying, "What are you going to see her for?" That thing?
Yeah.
No, I never had that. No.
Okay. do you like growing up? Were there, because Milwaukee and you live a little further out of town, but there are a lot of like ethnic enclaves and things like that.
Yeah.
Do you recall anything about like, I don't know, the division of the city like that?
Not a lot because I was away from it. I never believed in that. I've always thought that was extremely wrong. And then, of course, I remember the riots in the '60s. That was bad. That was.
What do you remember about that?
We were living in Waterford at the time, and I just remember being horrified that people could do stuff like this. Why are they being treated that way? That, to me, that was just not right. But I wasn't involved in any way, or I didn't know anybody. Well, I know a few people that are a little biased towards different races. And right now, to this day, one of my best friends is an African American man from our congregation, and he is just a wonderful. But he talks a little bit about how different, because he grew up in Milwaukee, and how hard that was, and rough, very tough. And now he lives out here, and he still has that feeling that people are looking down on him, and he is a wonderful man.
Yeah.
And
one of the big events in the memory of Milwaukee is the big blizzard of 1947.
Oh yeah.
What do you remember about that?
Oh, it was fun.
Fun.
It was fun.
A lot of snow.
My dad worked third shift, so he got home from work before the snow really hit us. And we lived in a subdivision bigger than the other one, than Cozy Dell. It was called Brosen Manor, and it was 90th in Montana. And we went to school that morning. They were forecasting snow, but it started coming down so fast and so heavy, and it was windy, so it was drifting. So they dismissed school early, and again we walked home. And I remember we had a hedge that ran the length of our yard. It was maybe about 3 feet tall. You couldn't see it. And we had a drift that went up to our attic window, which happened to be my brother's bedroom window, my two older brothers, and so they had to climb out the window and jump into that drift, But we were snowbound. This is before snowmobiles. My brothers would go to the store on skis for my mom if she needed anything. There was you couldn't drive any place. And our subdivision, we were just snowed in because we were on the bottom of the list of places that had to be plowed. And they didn't have the equipment that they do today. So we went for I'm thinking about a week. We had no school. You couldn't get out of your driveway. So, and people they had to get out. So the men in the subdivision got together and shoveled the streets. I remember that then they had, then there was so much snow you couldn't see if a car was coming from one of the side streets. So people would tie, they had the antennas on the cars then, and they would tie something red or something bright on their antenna so you could see that coming across, It was great. We had the best snow forts and sledding and a whole week and no school. That was, I don't remember how much snow we got, but I think the drifting is what made it so dangerous, really, But yeah, it was fun.
That's good. I think just some questions before we wrap up that are some kind of like big questions. Maybe what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned throughout your life, if you have to think about that?
If I could, I would like to be more patient. I come from a long line of intense people. My father was intense. My mother was calm. I didn't get her gene. yeah, it doesn't pay to get all upset about things because they work out if you keep your cool. Does that qualify as a lesson? Yeah.
It's a good mantra.
I would like a do-over with my kids because I was a tough mother. They had to behave, and it kind of landed on me because Dad was not there that often. I look at my children now and how they're raising their kids, and I'm thinking, they're good. You know? And they reason with them, and I was just, well, I was working full time, and I was busy, and I had all these kids, and I was tough on them. And that's not always the way. My dad was tough on us, but my mom was the one that would sit down and talk things over with you. I wish I was more like that, because you get further that way. Another lesson, don't get married again. That works for me, not for everybody else, but that works for me. I feel like, okay, I'm going to be 86 in 2 months, and I feel like I'm in a good place. I don't know, I just wish it wouldn't go so fast. I don't know what.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
One more is what is like something what is the one thing, if you had to pick one thing that you valued the most in your life?
My faith in my children.
Good
And
answer.
I get weepy about that. Sorry.
No.
Yeah, I'm very blessed. I have 4 wonderful children. I got 9 wonderful grandchildren and 2 wonderful great-grandchildren. And I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. And a lot of hard work along the way, but well worth it. Well worth it.